Let's get some perspective now from Republican Representative Mike Johnson from Louisiana. Congressman, thank you for joining us this evening. It was quite a night, and the Speaker, McCarthy, also had encouraged many of the members, in fact, all the members, to be polite, for lack of a better word here. I witnessed, as you did, I'm sure, inside the chamber, a number of outbursts, and I wonder if you can respond to how you felt in that moment about the atmosphere that was within the chambers this evening.
I'm not one that's into catcalls. It's not my style, but I understand the emotion that was in the room. I think when you heard a lot of the outburst, as it's been referred to, it's when the president was, I think, blatantly saying something that he knows is not true. He suggested that the Republicans, or many Republicans, I think he said, want to sunset Social Security and Medicare, and it's just simply not a fact. There's not a single member of the House Republican Conference who's ever said such a thing that I know of, and it's certainly not the position that we have. We've been very clear about our intention to save those programs, and we thought that that was an unfair statement.
Well, there was that moment, of course, where he did look and talk about finally a moment of unity here, and the idea of everyone agreeing that those two programs ought to remain in place. But there has obviously been some discussion by some members about ways in which to reflect on or have it come up for a vote or for appropriations purposes. Are you clear tonight that there is absolute unity within the Republican Party that neither program will be touched?
Yeah, look, I'm the vice chairman of the House Republicans. I'm in the number 5 leadership position. I'm very close to all my colleagues. I do not know a single one who suggested anything contrary to that. We've made a commitment to save those programs, but what we understand is you've got to solidify the foundations of those programs so that we can maintain them. They're on a trajectory to go bankrupt in less than 10 years. So we have to fix it. We need grown-ups in the room to make tough decisions on our budgeting going forward, and we're counting on the White House to have a good faith negotiation with us. It's not a good start to misstate the position of the other side, and I think that's what my colleagues were reacting to.
When you look at the prospects of bipartisanship, obviously there is quite the narrow majority, as you're well aware, in the House, but there's also, from the President of the United States today, seeming to call for an end to fighting, talking about what the American people have made clear that they want. Obviously, there is a divided Congress, and certainly the White House of a different party than those who are in the majority of the House. Do you see an opportunity for bipartisanship on any key efforts that you hope to promote right now?
Well, we certainly hope so. I mean, that's what the way this place is supposed to work. You're going to have people with very different ideas and philosophies and visions for the government. But at the end of the day, we have to get together and work those things out. That's how consensus is built. It's how the founders set this system up to work. And we've strayed away from that. And I think there's a willingness on both sides of the aisle to do that. But we have to come together on ideas that make sense. And what we heard tonight largely was, in our view, a speech that was really detached from the reality that I think most American people are actually feeling with regard to rising cost and rising crime and the open border and all the problems we're facing. We didn't hear the president actually addressing those directly and talking about the reality of those problems. So you have to agree on what the problems are before you can come together and fix them, and I think that's a big concern we have tonight.
What were the areas you felt that there was that detachment? Because he did mention, of course, the idea of the border, fentanyl. There was a moment, I think, perhaps caught some people off guard within the chambers that the president was speaking about fentanyl and about the overdosing in this country and the tragic numbers that we are seeing. And then he agreed with the idea of the chanting that the border was a contributing factor there. Were you surprised by any moments that the president seemed to agree with your party on these issues?
We were shocked to hear a couple of those lines. I'm sure a speechwriter put them in for political purposes, but that's not been the position of this president. Clearly, it is his policies that created the immigration catastrophe that we have right now. We've had hearings over the last 48 hours here in the Congress, in the House, where experts and Border Patrol agents and people directly involved on the ground have come to tell their stories about the horrors that they're facing every day because of the Department of Homeland Security and the Biden administration and the president himself, because of the policies that they have enacted. And so it was not a speech that matched reality, and that was our concern with it. We heard more tonight about cracking down on junk fees than we did illegal immigration and the threat from China. There were some lines in there that they of course inserted for applause, but it doesn't match his actions, and that's what we're deeply concerned about.
Well, Congressman, if you were only glass half full, maybe they were in there just to actually reflect what he thought. I hear your overall sentiment, but I think we can both agree the idea of not a single president has created the full immigration crisis we are seeing. But I understand the point that you're making. There was a response, of course, from the former Trump press secretary and current Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, delivered, of course, the rebuttal today and this evening. And she seems to make clear that there is a strong push, and so she's making one, for a generational and a cultural change that needs to take place. I wonder, is that the argument that you think is going to be the most effective for convincing voters why Republicans should lead?
I believe that's a big part of it. I believe we have to cast our vision and present our message to the American people. But the thing about conservatives and the Republican Party is that we stand for tried and true principles. They don't change. Ronald Reagan said in his farewell address, they call me the great communicator, but I really wasn't that. I was communicating great things. They're the same great things that have guided our nation since its founding, because we believe in individual freedom and limited government and the rule of law and peace through strength and fiscal responsibility, free markets, and human dignity. These are the things that made us great, and that's what we stand for. So I believe when we make that case to the American people, they agree with us. I believe we're still a center-right country, and they want sanity returned to our public policy. And we look forward to presenting that to the people over the next 2 years in the House Republican majority that we've been given here, and to making that case as we head into the 2024 cycle. We're excited about that. I'm very optimistic about the future.
Well, I love the optimism. We hope to hear the arguments soon. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.